before we start our meeting, I think we can preliminarily congratulate each other with Christmas, which will be in March. In 4 days. Yes, Joel?
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. As far as I remember, people say to each other, Happy Christmas and Merry New Year.
Well, yeah, no, in America, it's usually Merry Christmas. But I lived
Merry
in
Christmas.
I lived in the UK for 7 years, so yeah, Happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. Yeah, that's the way.
Okay, but you conflated two formulas into one by telling us Happy Christmas. Okay.
Yeah, okay, I guess, yeah, that's a conflation. Yeah.
Yes, we have a lot of examples of conflations in our New Testament texts.
Yes. That's
Okay. So
good
let's and on the eve of Christmas we almost approached Jerusalem. Лариса, как обычно, попросим вас тогда быть нашей греческой чтицей. Давайте прочтем всю перикопу, ну или не все, по крайней мере. Давайте, скажем, до стиха 48, да? Потому что так, когда уже у нас начнется реакция Иисуса, то будет немножко другая часть перикопы. So we start with verses 46 through 48.
Kai erchontai eis Ιεριχώ, kai εκπορεωμένου αυτού από Ιεριχώ, kai toi μετετών αυτού, kai όχλου χικανού γιος Τιμάιου Μπαρτιμάιους, τυφλός προσάιτες εκάτετο παράτεν водών. Kai ακούσας ότι Ιησούς γο Ναζαρενός εστίν, έρξατο κράτζειν kai λέγειν, Ιουε Δαβίδ Ιησού ελέησον με.
Let's move the whole text to the next page in order for us.
Kai επιτιμών αυτό πολλοί γίνα σιωπέσει. Κόδε πολλό μάλλον έκρατζεν Ιουε Δαβίδ ελέησον με.
Они дошли до Иерихона. Буквально, конечно, эйс Иерихо в Иерихон. Они пришли в Иерихон, может быть, действительно будет так лучше. По-русски мы скорее сказали бы дошли до Иерихона, не пришли в Иерихон. Как напишем, не пришли в Иерихон? Еще тогда, когда я только начинал работать над этим переводом, наверное, был немножко более склонен к dynamic equivalence. Вот. А сейчас, наверное, чуть больше склоняюсь к тому, чтобы возможности передавать какие-то конструкции оригинала. В Иерихон, так в Иерихон. Когда Иисус в сопровождении учеников большой толпы народа выходил из Иерихона, возможно, вот из-за этого пришли, выходил, я как-то попробовал немножко изменить первую фразу. При дороге сидел слепой нищий, Вартимей, сын Тимея. Услышав, что тут Иисус Назарянин, он начал кричать: «Сын Давидов, Иисус, сжалься надо мною!» Люди прикрикнули на него, чтобы он замолчал, но он громче стал кричать: «Сын Давидов, сжалься надо мною!» Если говорить про уровень слов, то, конечно, здесь вопрос, что значит эпитимау, как это по-русски выразить. Буквально, конечно, люди стали запрещать ему, чтобы он не кричал, чтобы он замолчал. We're speaking about the Russian translation of the epitimao. In this case, I just said that when I started working with this text, I probably was a bit more inclined to follow the principles of dynamic equivalence or functional equivalence than now. I see that quite often people with age become less dynamic and more inclined to follow the literal constructions. I translated this epitimao as people started to shout at him, so that he stopped. But of course, the Greek epitimao does not have explicitly this semantics of shouting or telling. I don't know.
Yeah, well, of course, it's the same verb that he uses elsewhere, right? For rebuking, like in 4:35, I think, that he rebukes, or somewhere in near the end of chapter 4, he rebukes the sea. So you don't want to. Do you want to use the same verb that you used? And also, when Jesus rebukes Peter in chapter 8, after Peter has said, "You mustn't suffer." So, I don't know. I think it's an important verb in the gospel. Though it's a little bit puzzling. Here it's not Jesus rebuking, but the crowd. But I think it's still significant that the same verb is being used.
Yes, let's check. I think you're right that epitimao is one of the key words in the Gospel of Mark. Most often it's used on the lips of Jesus himself.
And I think the first time is in chapter 1 in the synagogue in Capernaum, where he rebukes the demon. And, this verb is characteristically connected with exorcism, I think, in Mark and outside of Mark.
Yes, do you see it? That's Mark 1:25. Mark 1:25.
Mm.
Иисус приказал ему, Иисус запретил ему, in different Russian versions.
Mhm. So have you in your translation what did you use in 125 and these other instances? Have you been consistent?
No. And now I'm thinking whether I was right. In 1:25 I have Иисус приказал ему.
Which is what?
Let's look at the
It's,
space. Можно мы здесь сказать, Иисус прикликнул на него, уймись и выйди из него? Что скажете, Лариса?
Так можно, но просто если иметь в виду, что это действительно ключевой термин экзорцизма, то очень трудно его сохранить во всех ситуациях.
Ну, конечно, хотелось бы. Вот, что здесь в 25 стихе, Ларис, лучше? Иисус приказал ему или Иисус прикрикнул на него?
Сказал лучше, по-моему.
Маша, вы что скажете?
Ну, хочется использовать что-нибудь вроде «заклинать». Мы не можем такое использовать, чтобы оставить вот эту идею экзорцизма.
Смотрите, у нас это далеко не действенное место. Вернемся к нашему Bible Works. Строго запрещал им разглашать, кто он. Он проснулся. Ну, видите, синодальный перевод достаточно последовательно пишет «запретил». Хотя с ветром здесь немножко сложнее. И строго запретил им, чтобы они никому не говорили ничего. Петр начал, как мы сделали это в нашем месте 8:32, может быть, ключевом месте, посвященном этому стиху.
Когда мы в прошлый раз обсуждали, мы решили, что нельзя для эпитемао найти какой-то единый термин. Что это слишком сложное
По возможности.
понятие.
Ну да, ну вот я сейчас вывел на доску. Видно нашу диглотту? Как раз видите, мы отмечали это самое эпитемао. Иисус эпитимесен запретил им. Петр отвел в сторону, стал запрещать ему это, отдергивать его. Я помню, что в этом ключевом месте мы все равно так ни на чем смысленном и не остановились. Петр отвел в сторону, стал запрещать ему. Да? У нас
I think one thing that's interesting is that, in most of these instances, there's some sort of connection with demons or Satan. And even here, in 8:30, Jesus rebukes the disciples, and then Peter rebukes him in verse 32. And then Jesus calls Peter Satan, in the continuation of the passage. So there's, even when it's not explicit in most of these in some of the cases it's not explicit, but there is, like here, a penumbra, a context which is demonic.
okay. Can we
Is
see?
it more demonic or more about recovering the true essence of the Jesus?
Well, I guess I think for Mark, those things are connected, because the true essence of Jesus is, that he is the victor over the demons. I mean, the whole gospel starts with, he front loads an exorcism in chapter 1. So I don't see those necessarily as contradictory. But yeah, certainly you're right that, what basically this passage in chapter 8 is about is, what sort of Messiah is Jesus? Peter recognizes him as Messiah, but he doesn't recognize him as suffering Messiah. So you're certainly right, that passage is intrinsically about the true essence of Jesus. But I think it's connected in Mark's mind with victory over the demons, his true essence is.
Yes, even in the place that we looked at now, do we now see Bible works or our dialogue?
Your
Dialogue.
Well, okay, let's look at Bible works. Yes, at first glance, it looks as if this passage is not of the same nature as other passages with the verb epitimao, but because here it's not Jesus who is the subject, but hoi polloi, people who do not understand anything. But on the other hand, these hoi polloi are doing exactly what Jesus was doing when he was epitimon.
Well, there is a similarity to the previous passage in chapter 8, because there, both Peter and Jesus are the subjects of the verb, right? Peter
Yes.
epitimesen Jesus for prophesying that he would suffer. So I think, if you wanted to be consistent about the demonic interpretation, maybe this instance in chapter 10 is, it's demonic because it's opposing the revelation that Jesus is the Son of David. But we can get back to that.
Or maybe in the context of the messianic secret, which really runs through the Gospel of Mark, we can say that epitomao occurs again and again when someone is somehow disclosing the true nature of Jesus. And either Jesus or Peter, even Hoi are trying to silence the blind man proclaims Jesus to be Son of David. And if you look at the Gospel of Mark, then this is the first time in the Gospel when Mark is called Ios David.
Yes, and this leads to a big discussion amongst exegetes of Mark. Is Son of David an adequate title for Jesus? Or is it, does it reveal some misunderstanding to call Jesus Son of David? Now, I think it's significant that in this passage, the crowd tries to silence Bartimaeus. He says, Son of David. They tell him to be quiet, and he shouts it all the more. So I say that there's a boomerang effect. They try to shut him up, but he reveals, but that's unsuccessful because he just repeats, and even louder, he repeats his estimate of Jesus as Son of David.
Yes,
but I think some people want to differentiate between Son of David and Son of God, and they want to say that Son of David is an inadequate title and Son of God is an adequate title. But I don't agree with that, and we could get into why later on if you want.
Yes, but look, what now strikes me is that this verb occurs every time a new title is ascribed to Jesus. Do you now see Bible Works screen or our dialogue?
Yeah, it's Bible Works.
Bible Works, yes. In Mark 1:24, for the first time, a demon proclaims Jesus to be Hagios Tuteu.
Okay.
And immediately in the next verse, we see Jesus epitimisan autou, in order that he does not proclaim his identity as Hagios Tuteu.
Mm-hmm.
Then we hear that the unclean spirits cried, the Jews is Hagios Tuteu.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately we hear that Jesus Pola epitima autois, kinemeotron phaneron poiesosin. Then the most important passage dealing with epitimao is Peter's recognition of Jews as Messiah. And once again, Jews epitimis autois. And finally, our small concordance shows us this is the last word, the last occurrence of this word in Mark. Bartimaeus, for the first time, proclaims him as Hios David, and here not Jesus, but the crowds, but the epitimon.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I think take into account that these four titles, the Saint of God, the Son of God, the Messiah, and the Son of David, these four titles are four most important points of Christology, at least according to the Gospel of Mark. It's striking that every time this term appears for the first time, it's followed by someone who epitima.
Yes, and why would you say that is? Why that connection?
I don't know, but I think it has something to do with, at least in my mind, to my mind, this has something to do with the Markan idea of Messianic secret, which is not only Messianic secret. This is the secret, the fact that he's son of David is also kept to be kept in secrecy, and the fact that he's son of God is also to be kept in secrecy.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
and another point is that just as we read here that the more they tried to stop him, the more he was crying and proclaiming. The same is with other titles as well. The more Jesus tells people not to make his identity known, the more they glorify him and tell about him.
yeah, I mean, that does happen several times.
Yes, it happens
Happens, for
several
example,
times,
with
and it also accompanies the unsuccessful attempt to epitiman.
Which unsuccessful attempt? Here, you mean?
I think that ultimately all of them are unsuccessful because despite Jesus' attempts to prevent people from telling his true identity, and despite the attempt of Hoipoloi to stop the blind Bartimaeus from proclaiming Jesus' identity as son of David, this identity is now revealed to the whole world through several billion publications of Gospel of Mark in different languages. So it's the most unsuccessful secret in the world.
Yeah. Well, and you know this from the very first verse of the gospel, you know, that Jesus is the Messiah, and, you know, whether or not he's son of God in 1:1, you know, there's a textual question there, but at least by 1:11, you know, you hear the voice from heaven saying that he's Son of God. So I personally think that the attempt to play these titles off against each other and say Son of God is the true identity and Son of David or Messiah is inadequate are exaggerated, and they're coming from someplace else than exegesis. You know, they're coming from I mean, this interpretation, this kind of conflicted interpretation of Christological titles I've mentioned before, was very popular in like the late 60s and early 70s, and it was part of a sort of anti-establishment mood amongst some of the exegetes. And they connected Davidic messiahship with the established church, and they thought that Mark's gospel was a polemic against the established church. And I think you have some attraction to this hypothesis, but I'm not
Yes, but
convinced.
I have some attraction to criticism and opposition to established religious hierarchies.
Mm.
But at least as concerns the hypothesis that you mentioned just now, I think that the very usage of the verb epitimao that we traced today is a significant argument against playing these titles against each other, because it seems that they are all treated in the gospel in the same way, that some power wants to suppress this title, but still becomes the normal title for Jesus. So in this case, though the anti-hierarchical ideas may be quite close to me, but in this case, I completely agree with you that the idea to play different titles against each other does not seem to have real ground in the text.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
And who was the main proponents of this hypothesis?
Oh, well, it was Norman Perrin and his students, Dominic Crossan. There were, this Theodore Whedon, who I've mentioned before, who he thought that Jesus, that Mark's theology was a corrective Christology. You know, so he thought that the miracle stories set up a false view of Jesus in the first half of the gospel, and that in the second half of the gospel, that's corrected through the idea of the suffering Messiah. So, but yeah, it was Norman Perrin. Huh?
Was it Norman Perrin who wanted to play against each other the first and the second parts of the gospel?
It was, well, I think that's especially associated with Theodore Whedon, who was a student of Perrin's. And Perrin only wrote, I think, an article or two about Mark's Christology, but his students, Whedon and Crossan, and there was another guy, a Catholic priest, who's still alive. You know, they all produced dissertations on Mark's Christology, which were, you know, basically along the same lines. So, John Donahue was one of them. I think Donahue later repented a little bit. So, but I don't know. It seems like kind of a crazy rhetorical strategy to like, to start a gospel in one way and give a certain impression of Jesus and then knock it down. It was kind of deconstructive in its analysis, but it was very influential.
Okay. It's interesting that as far as I saw in your commentary and that of Adela, this parallelism between the crowd's attempt to silence Epitiman, the blind man, in order for him not to declare the true identity of Jesus, with other cases of this kind, I do not see these parallels noted, but I think it's really important for the gospel.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this one is different because it's not Jesus who's doing the silencing. So, it is the same verb, but it's a little bit different. Because, and I guess I would connect it more with Peter in chapter 8. He also tries to silence Jesus when Jesus is saying the truth, right? That strikes me as the strongest parallel. In both cases, in 1048 and 8, whatever it was, a character other than Jesus tries to silence what is actually a true perception of who Jesus is or what Jesus has to go through. But in neither case, in both cases, they don't succeed. Because in chapter 8, Jesus comes back and rebukes Peter for his rebuke of Jesus. And here, Bartimaeus shouts all the louder when they try to silence him. The other thing that's important, I think, in the course of the gospel is immediately after this, Jesus enters into Jerusalem, and I don't think he's not called Son of David, but the crowd say, "Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David." So there is a connection with the Davidic image and with the idea of David being a father.
Okay.
I think the Paranites would say that's also a misperception. But everything's a misperception except what they believe. So.
Yes. I have a strange question. Here in our text, we have epitimison, epitimon auto poloi. Has some strange resemblance to one of the earlier passages with this epitima, where Jesus polla epitima autois. I don't know what to do with this. This is just a coincidence, whether there's something behind this. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the closer instance of this word, polus, is in 1046, I think. A lutron antipolon, or 1045, I guess. It's 1045.
Yes. Antipolon. But these are different
Yeah.
polloi, because polloi in Mark 10:45 are good polloi, those
Yeah.
who are chosen to become Jesus' disciples and to become ransomed. While in Mark
Yeah.
10:48, probably these polloi, are they really hostile to Jesus, or they just don't want to bother Jesus with this half-mad blind person?
Yeah. Well, and it's
What?
funny because when Jesus calls, he says, well, call him. Then they turn and they say, oh, he's calling you. Come on. So all of a sudden they're on his side, right? In in 1049, Jesus says, he stands still and he says, call him. And they call the blind man, saying to him, take courage, he's calling you. So I assume that's the crowd. I guess it could be the disciples.
Okay. Do we have any more comments or questions with regard to the first half of this pericope?
I guess just thinking about your, connection of Palouse with epitimon, I mean, maybe part of the reason for that connection is, I mean, epitimon is in the context of this gospel, it's a pretty strong or even violent term. And so connecting it with Palouse, Paloi, or Pala seems to me to make some sort of sense.
Yes, at some moment, looking at this parallelism between Jesus, who epitima pola, and hoi poloi, who epitimon, I thought that probably, is it possible that there is some textual corruption behind this? But then I thought that this would be too bold a hypothesis.
Well, it's possible. I mean, who knows? Yeah. I mean, I could see it could. I mean, an Omicron iota looks an awful lot like an alpha, actually, doesn't it?
Yes, but
But we need some evidence.
we need some evidence.
There's one New Testament textual critic, Keith Elliott. I think he recently died. J.K. Elliott. He also did an edition of the New Testament Apocrypha. But his principle was any variant that turned up in any manuscript, no matter how late, has a reasonable chance of being original, because he thinks, the the process of corruption just happened so fast that it's likely that, original readings were lost and may have just been retained in some 13th century manuscript somewhere. I don't think most text critics have gone along with him, but I think in this case, it's plausible that that sort of corruption might have happened, but it's just moving from possibility to probability that is the difficulty.
May I have a short question? I'm sorry, maybe I missed it and you already discussed it. I just wanted to ask about Son of David. Is it right that this title is used only once here in Mark, but it's much more common for Matthew, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And Matthew's genealogy goes back to David. Whereas Luke's genealogy goes back to Luke. And yeah, I think probably the Davidic image, I think it's important to Mark, but and it is, of course, there's a connection in the history of religion between the Davidic image and Messiah, which is, of course, all over Mark, Christos. But the usages of the term David and of the specific Davidic image, I think it's right. They are more prominent in Matthew. And it's kind of similar to, I think Mark uses the Mosaic image, the image of Moses too, but it's much more prominent in Matthew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just in chapter 12, it looks like Jesus is argues against identifying Jesus, Messiah, and as son of David in 12:30.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, so my question is, could it be somehow that Mark is against this identification?
Well, yeah, I think it's complex, and I've written an article about this. The passage about the Son of David in 12:35 to 37. It seems on the face of it to me to question that the Messiah and hence Jesus is the Son of David. So I think Mark wants to both affirm the Davidic image and also qualify it. And I argued that this reflects maybe Mark's own situation with the background in the Jewish war, which may have been led by messianic figures. So he both wants to say Jesus is the Messiah, but he's and is the Son of David, but there's certain Davidic implications that he's wary about. But yeah, when we get to chapter 12, that does make a problem.
I can't catch what you mean. What are Davidic implications?
Well, because David is not only a king but also a military figure, and so, and I guess this also reflects my view.
I got it. Okay, yeah. So you mean that Messiah for Mark is not the same as Davidic Messiah in other
Well, again,
sources.
certain implications of Davidic messianism,
Mhm.
you know, may be hard for Mark,
Yeah.
because I mean, you know, what was it that caused the Jews to revolt against the Romans? You know, was it just you know, that economic conditions were bad, or was it also that they thought they could win because God would intervene on their side through a, you know, some sort of Davidic figure? You know, that if they started the war, then God would finish it. So I guess I think that, you know, Martin Hengel's dissertation about the Zealots, that there's a lot that's valuable in there. And, you know, that's, he sort of traces a revolutionary theology that he thinks was behind the revolt against the Romans, and that had biblical roots, and, you know, including in Davidic messianism and other eschatological passages. But you know, you're right to point to 12:35 to 37, because I do think in this case a certain expectation is set up, a certain positive association with David and Davidic messianism is set up in chapter 10, that then is, and the beginning of chapter 11, where the crowd hails Jesus and links him with the coming kingdom of David. But then in chapter 12, I don't know any way of, I can't find a way of reading 12:35 to 37 that is not a qualification of Davidic messianism. How do the scribes say that the Christ is the son of David? And usually what the scribes say is wrong or misleading. So I guess in that case, I do kind of believe in the deconstruction theory to a certain extent, in the transition from chapter 10 to chapter 12.
Can you make it more precise? What particular reconstruction theory do you have in mind? Who is deconstructing and what?
Well, I think Mark wants to say, yes, Jesus is the son of David, but he wants to, you know,
Okay.
define that. You know, he thinks that Jesus is a victorious and even military figure, but who's he victorious over? You know, you know, who's the battle against? The battle in this gospel seems, you know, from the very beginning to be primarily against the demons. Now, there are human beings who seem to range themselves on the demonic side, but I guess I think that what Mark wants to affirm is that Jesus is a successful warrior, and that, you know, there's a holy war going on, but the primary adversaries are not human beings.
Okay, thank you. Meanwhile, I made some changes into our Russian text, trying to make it a bit more literal than it was when I first drafted this translation. Услышав, тут Иисус Назарянин начал кричать: «Сын Давидов, Иисус, жалься надо мной». Многие запрещали ему, пусть замолчит, но он только громче кричал: «Сын Давидов, жалься надо мной».
Can you go back to your dialect?
Okay. Here is our dialogue. where
Spasiba.
where I made verse 48 a bit more literal and less dynamic, though probably less dynamic but not less expressive.
Can I point out something like above at the beginning in 1046?
Okay.
Yeah, no, 1046. Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
It is kind of strange that in 1046, the beginning, they came into Jericho. And then 1046b, and going out of Jericho, he's met by Bartimaeus. And there are some texts that leave out the Kai Erchontai es Jericho. So, I mean, I could see how that might be a scribal gloss. Because if the passage just started with, and going out of Jericho, you know, the reader might think, now, wait a second, when did they come to Jericho? And so a scribe could have put in Kai Erchontai es Jericho.
Yes, it's very interesting. You say that this hypothesis even has some manuscript support.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, so it's missing in B, which isn't that Alexandrinus or
That's probably Vaticanus.
or it's Vaticanus?
Yes, I think so.
And also Sahidic manuscripts. So that's what my Nestle Alan gives as so I don't know, maybe there's other manuscripts, you know, it doesn't seem like very wide attestation, but still Vaticanus is, you know, an important witness.
It's obviously the editors of the Greek New Testament United Bible Societies didn't consider this textual difference important because they do not have any mention on this, any note on verse 46. But that's
You talking about the Metzger commentary, or I mean,
yes,
there is. Yeah.
Yes, I'm talking about this particular small book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I mean, it is in the Nestle Aland in the 27th edition, which I have here. Yeah.
Yes. Nestle Aland has a much more detailed apparatus than
Yeah.
this edition. But this edition has ranking among variant readings. That's why I decided to look at it and to see what ranking have they ascribed to the absence of Kai Erchontai at the beginning of verse 46. And I found out that they haven't ascribed any importance to this, but probably they were wrong, because as you say, it looks like a gloss, because otherwise we have to answer the question, what did they do in Jericho in between
Mhm.
coming in and going out?
Yeah. No, I think there's a good argument for it being a gloss.
It reminds me about famous case with the Old Testament, where in the Greek translation, Cain says to Abel, let's go out to the field. And then they go to the field. But the Hebrew text lacks these words, and it's very probable that they were just the result of editorial activity of the Greek translators, or maybe the scribes or their Vorlage.
Because the scribes, like as here, the scribes were trying to figure out, well, why did they go out to the field together?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also another thing that might have puzzled the scribes, namely that Hebrew verb amar always require, according to the rules of the Hebrew grammar, require direct speech. And in the Hebrew text, we just read, Cain said to Abel, full stop, and when they were in the field.
All right. Oh, that's good.
This.
Huh. So you think the original or the earlier text is Cain said to Abel, and when they were in the field, it's something like that?
No, because as a scholar of the Hebrew language, I'm also puzzled with the absence of direct speech. So my understanding is that in the original version, Cain said to Abel something. Then on the next stage, this something was lost in the manuscript transmission of the Hebrew text. And then on the even next level of textual transmission, the scribes had to fill in what was lost. But they did it just filling in the information that was supplied by the context, in the same way as we have here. Is Jericho.
Yeah.
This is just the information supplied by the context.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Okay. So, and the problem in both cases is actually that it fits too well with the context, right? Or
yes,
that it looks like an attempt, a kind of clumsy attempt to fill in a gap.
Yes. It fits, on the one hand, it fits too well because it's composed from the same words that we see in the context. But on the other hand, it doesn't really fit because in normal narrative flow, you wouldn't make narrative this way. They came to Jericho and they came out of Jericho. Unless the writer wanted somehow to tell something that happened in Jericho. This was,
yeah.
You're right. This is a very strange text, the Greek text.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I was first alerted to it because it plays a role in some of the reconstructions of Secret Mark.
Really?
They argue that there was, that secret Mark, which was the original Mark, had an incident here in Jericho that then, the Orthodox Mark eliminated. But, I
Okay.
think that's kind of crazy too. But they do,
But I'm afraid
they
that
do,
everything connected to the secret mark is close to be crazy.
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the whole secret Mark thing may have been invented by Morton Smith. I think there's a good case to be made for that.
I didn't investigate the case, and Morton Smith did indicate that his secret mark had something in verse 46.
I can't remember if this is Morton's own development of the secret Mark idea or whether it may be Helmut Kerster who was on board and who wrote, or co-authored a long article, I think, way back in the 70s, that I don't think was ever published, but it was in a, SBL presentation. So I'll have to check on that. I know it's something that I worried about at one time, but now I don't think I needed to worry about it. But
Yes,
I
it
know
seems
this passage does come up, yeah.
it seems nowadays the hypothesis of secret mark is not as popular as it was once.
No, I think so. And yeah, I mean, one of our graduate students, did a short book in which he argued just on the basis of like the handwriting, that it wasn't uh, that it wasn't written by an ancient scribe. It wasn't written by somebody whose native language was Greek, but by somebody, very carefully trying to counterfeit a like a medieval hand. But I think the scholarly consensus has swung against secret Mark in the last 20 or 30 years.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have any more remarks or questions with regard to the first half of this story? Есть у нас еще какие-то вопросы по русскому тексту, по греческому тексту, первой половинке этой истории, вот до стиха 48.
Есть
If I
вопрос.
may, давайте вы сначала.
Но у меня вопрос по поводу «сжалься надо мной», потому что настолько принято переводить Элейсон по-русски как «помилуй», что, может быть, оставить.
Ну да. Но по-русски нет ли слова «помиловать» почти исключительно ассоциации с «казнить нельзя помиловать»? Нет?
Скорее уж, Господи, помилуй.
Да, Кирилл Элейсон. Ну, здесь, собственно, прямая связь между этой молитвой и такими местами в Евангелии.
Но я просто пытаюсь себе представить, вот кто-то там идет по улице, неважно кто. Вот. И какой-то человек вдруг кричит с обочины: «Петр Петрович, помилуй меня». Не будет ли это в нормальном русском юзадже? Скорее говорит не о том, что мимо идет целитель или человек с сверхъестественными способностями, который может даровать зрение, а о том, что какие-то такие судебно-юридическо-палаческие ассоциации, нет?
Но мне просто кажется, что уже от последующей церковной, так сказать, практики это оторвать очень трудно. Понятно, что на момент написания текста, наверное, это все было так, как вы говорите, но сейчас уже этого избежать нельзя.
Ну, не знаю. Маша, вы что скажете?
Мне нравится помилуй.
Мгм.
Но сложилась же уже традиция, как идти поперек традиции.
Помилуй нас, Господи, помилуй нас.
Ну да, но у нас по-русски это как-то относится с идеей, играется именно с идеей суда. Вот, хотя оригинально это, может быть, и не так было. Ну хорошо, давайте подумаем. Мне что-то очень это жалость надо мной нравилось, когда я его писал.
Можно? Мне кажется, что вот как раз с идеей суда связан глагол «помиловать». В смысле, наоборот, помилование. Вот это да. А вот так вот «помилуй», по-моему, не имеет вот прямой такой связи с идеей суда. Вот в такой форме, мне кажется. Но это вот так очень со стороны.
Ну хорошо, ладно, я подумаю, видите, выделил специально красным цветом, чтобы вернуться. Спасибо, Лариса. Маша, вы хотели что-то сказать?
To finish with Son of David, I wanted also to offer comparing it with John 7, 7. I think you should know this place. Just 1 second. What's it? Yeah, 7:42. Here in the previous verse, Jesus is. It is said about Jesus that he is from Galilee, and in the next verse, people argue that he can't be Messiah because Messiah should be from Bethlehem. It could be interesting to compare this place and ours because for Matthew and for Luke, Jesus is from Bethlehem, and Matthew uses a lot this title, but for Mark, he's also from Galilee, and probably that's why people rebuke the blind man who says that he is son of David, because they also know that he is Nazarenos, he's called just in the previous verse.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a very relevant passage, and it's been used. I mean, you could argue either that it reveals that, there were people knew that Jesus was not from Bethlehem or from the line of David, or that it reveals that he was, and that this is an example of Johannine irony. They're saying this thing when they don't realize that that it's actually, they think that it's a refutation, but it's actually not.
Mhm.
And it's been used to argue both sides of that. And I think in the article that I wrote on 1235 to 37, I suggested that maybe Jesus was not from a Davidic line, that whole genealogy has been made up for him, because of the belief that, he was the Messiah. But other people,
Yeah, that's what I want to say, that there were like two traditions. First, maybe earlier, not associating him with David and with Bethlehem, and the other which invented this
yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, I mean, that seems plausible to me, that, somehow the belief grew up that he was the Messiah. Well, if he's the Messiah, then he must be from the line of David. But
That's what I mean.
And from Bethlehem.
And from Bethlehem, because the scripture says he has to. And the, related to the Christmas season, the two genealogies in Matthew and Luke, they both associated him with Bethlehem, but in the narrative in Luke, his parents are actually from Nazareth. They just come to Bethlehem because of the census, whereas in Matthew, they're from, it seems like Bethlehem is their home. So I think both of those gospels are working with the same data, and the data is Jesus was called a Nazarene. He was associated with Nazareth, but B, the scripture says that the Messiah is to be from Bethlehem. Sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah.
If Nazarenes means from Nazareth.
I think both Luke in his prologue and Matthew in his prologue, they try to cope with a problem indicated in John 7:42.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think I agree with that. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Could I mention, just before we leave, I found the secret gospel of Mark. I'm going to give you the secret.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The original?
Well, from Morton's book, this is what he says it says. So first of all, earlier in chapter 10, Clement tells us, according to this secret letter that Morton either discovered or invented, after Mark 10:34, there's a passage where Jesus initiates a young man. A young man comes to Jesus wearing only a linen cloth, and Jesus initiates him into the secret of the kingdom, right? That's earlier. But then there's another excerpt after in Mark 10:46. So Clement says that after the words, and he comes into Jericho, the secret gospel adds, and the sister of the youth whom Jesus loved, and his mother and Salome were there, and Jesus did not receive them. So that's what the secret gospel says is between 1046a and 1046b. It's a continuation of the story of Jesus and this youth whom Jesus loved. So that's how it figures into the theory, and checking my commentary, this theory is developed by Helmut Kerster in this article that I mentioned.
Sure. Can you send us a link to the
Sure.
book that you quoted?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just something I found on the web. Yeah, I think it's the Wikipedia article, but I'll send you the link. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
And
a
also
reliable source.
article about Mark 12:35.
What about
If you
12?
have,
Oh, yeah, okay. My article about 1235. Yeah,
thank you.
good. Okay, so you've heard secrets.
Yes. Okay. I thought that we'll deal with the whole story today, but there were, as usual, there were too many interesting issues to be discussed. So I think that we have to stop in the middle of the story. And we have to wish once again to each other Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Same to
Yeah.
you. So see you
Yes.
next week, right?
And
Or
I think that next week I'll be traveling to meet with my
okay.
son in Portugal. So probably
Oh,
we'll have to miss some of our Thursdays.
well, have a good trip.
Thank you.
Enjoy the beach.
Yes, as far as I understand, Portugal at this time of the year is not the best place for swimming.
Huh. Okay. Well,
Okay.
enjoy the food
you.
then.
Thank you.
Okay. До свидания.
До
До скорого.
свидания.
Thank you.
Bye.
Merry
Bye.
Christmas.
Bye. Same to you.
С Новым годом всех еще раз.
С Новым годом. Всего доброго.
Всего доброго.
До свидания.